I think there's a misconception that when I did make a video about this or any other program, that I'm like the guy that's trying to tell the world-class coach how to handle his world-class athletes. And it's the exact opposite. It's
I don't see it that way at all. I never have.
I think a lot of people get that impression.
That's their problem.
Yeah.
So we're right in the middle of mine and Dave's discussion about Westside. We talked about so many things over the 4-hour stretch, and this is the part that I wanted to share with you guys because I think this was one of the more useful parts of our conversation. A lot of people, I think, really thought Dave was going to take me to task over things I had said, critiques I've made in the past, and that, I believe, stems from a grave oversimplification of what my stance is and what his stance is. And Dave, especially I got from this interview, really likes to concern himself with the details, the things that aren't being expressed or that are hard to define or can't be expressed. And he obsesses over that because there's so much variability and there's so much that a coach or an influencer has to be on the hook for when it comes to disseminating information. So this was a really insightful discussion. I wanted to share it with you guys. Real quick though, the Bromley Barbell Apparel collaboration is complete. You can click the link in the description and that will take you to a page that features 2 brand new t-shirts that are part of the Bromley Barbell Apparel collaboration. So I'm really excited about these. They just released like yesterday. I haven't even gotten mine in the mail yet. So go to Barbell Apparel, check those out. Thank you so much for the support, guys.
No, let me explain why, because I think this is an important point, right? Because if somebody who understands waving, right? Yeah. Like how waves should operate, there's some basic principles that need to be at play, right? That just have to be at play for a program to work. You know, if somebody that has those basic principles are looking at something and they're looking at the context of what's being presented, and then they find the holes, those holes are not the person who's finding the holes' fault. The holes are the fault of the people that are doing the presenting because they left stuff out they probably should have put in there or should explain or maybe even need to re-examine. Right? Because legitimately it could have been like, oh, fuck. Mm-hmm. That's not right.
And you don't know until you have a bunch of people run through it and you see those holes. And yes. I came at it from the perspective of the consumer. You know, I was a person that was, and you know, Lou had just so much information and a lot of it he was really absolute about, right? But then you talk to somebody like you talk to somebody else that spent a lot of time there and they're like, well, you know, there's this kind of wiggle room that you operate in that's key, that's crucial, but how the hell do you write that down on paper?
That's a tough one though.
And yeah, there's a point where you can't even fault somebody for missing that because, and that's where, you know, you get stuck between a rock and a hard place because on the one hand there's recommendations that you do X, Y, or Z, that you run the system, but on the other hand it's true. Yes. If you're not at Westside, you're not running Westside.
No.
So as a consumer it's like, what do you do with that and how do you navigate your way around that?
And to elaborate on that, that was always the crux of the issues I had because I had ran it myself, but I had specifically worked with so many different people that were new lifters and got brought into the system and became transfixed with the recommendations, with the articles, with the DVDs that had very, very clear and concise recommendations for how to run the program. Not just recommendations, but they were essentially given as absolutes. Like, this is what you have to do. So it's really interesting to hear Dave's take on this. And I've heard this from quite a few people that have also spent a lot of time in the system and were able to get it to work for themselves, but seem to have a handle on what elements worked that maybe went unspoken. And guys, real quick, I got to give a shout out to one of our main sponsors, Boostcamp. Boostcamp is a fantastic learning resource. It has so many programs in it, even if you don't use it to log your workouts, as a learning resource to be able to scour through all of these programs from some of your favorite content creators, some of your favorite coaches, everybody from Greg Nuckols, you have Mr. Natural Universe, Alberto Nunez, Cody Lefever's GZCL. My programs are up there. It is absolutely free to use. It is super convenient to plug your numbers in and go to town. So the link to Boostcamp will be in the description. Trust me when I say you guys won't regret it. Thanks so much for the support, guys. Now back to the show.
And again, it's tricky. I don't think there is a right answer.
I think there's clues, mm-hmm. right? And there's always kings of certain mountains, right? So let's say Louis is the king of conjugate concurrent. Like, I need to say both together because that's a whole different story there. But all right, let's just say he's the king of that mountain. And let's say Ender Darden is the king of like the HIIT training mountain, or Ken Leistner, or whoever you want to put there. And then, on the volume, let's just say it's Arnold Schwarzenegger, or whoever you want to be able to put there. When they're, and I suppose in other sports, jiu-jitsu or whatever, there's going to be people of certain disciplines that they're the king of those mountains. They have to be the way that they are, right?
Yeah, I agree with that.
They kind of do, right? And that, I look at that impartially. I don't see that as a bad thing, because when I was trying to really figure out, because I used to run HIIT training in my off season for powerlifting before coming to Westside, because I would take a month off. I didn't want to be in the gym. It was fast. Now I didn't do the whole body in one day shit, but I like the idea of finding one set, one warm-up set, then one work set, and being in and out fast. So I knew when I was looking at their content, this is biased. And they're not going to see any other view outside of that. No, they're going to try to pull in other stuff to build what they're doing, but they're going to do it under their own cognitive dissonances. I don't see as a bad thing, because it's broadening what that is. I think when people figure out or see who's the king of this mountain, then that's where they set. Then there's pros and cons to that. The pros are, this is the base of where all this is coming from. Then as you move down, then you'll see some of the other things, like here's where there's variance, because when you're talking about these kings of these mountains on all these different things, and then we want to just take powerlifting an example. You can take every top powerlifter, which is, we don't want to do, but just for sake of comparison, every top lifter has one thing in common. The program that they're doing is specific to them based upon needs that they figured out for themselves, right?
True.
So nobody's doing, there's no mountain that has produced more people at the top, when across the whole top, the only commonality is they figured it out for themselves. They may have used this mountain or this mountain or this mountain, but they manipulated the variables.
So I really like how Dave puts this, because instead of looking at it like there is objectively somebody with a right answer and that other people have wrong answers, that there's somebody with authority who's disseminating things a certain way, and you can say, well, either they're doing it perfectly for everybody or they're not. Instead, you look at it in this kind of active dynamic where tension is being applied. People have their roles, and they can't really be expected to any certain degree to go beyond that. So we're getting a little philosophical here, but it reminds me of discussion about like common social issues, the way people clash, and you take the left or the right, or you take, whatever group you want to talk about. And there's this viewpoint when you're on that side of the fence that we have the right answer and we need to defeat the other people that have the wrong answer. When in reality, if you pull the lens back, you are going to see that it actually works in everybody's best interest when there's a certain consistent amount of tension, and in the middle is where we stabilize society and find a route that actually does work the best for everybody. So with this, you're looking at the authority, the guru, so to speak, that has his method. He's the king of that mountain, and he's building a firm foundation around this principle. This is the thing he's fixing to the wall. And as long as people can go there, learn, and they're on the hook for kind of referencing everything else they've learned, and being able to find some path that works for them by their own trial and error, that tends to be how you get a better result overall. So I was very charitable to that point of view, and I tend to agree with it.
Where that's what I've been trying to get people to understand, is when you're moving that and you can figure out these things that a lot of them you're presenting. Like, here's the gears of what operates these things. Mm-hmm. These are the things you need to be cognizant of as you're moving through there. Now, coaching's different, because now you got to be, how are you teaching? It's a whole different level. There's the lifter trying to use it for themselves, but then the person that's doing the teaching as well. I've always tried to avoid this top thing, because it's too, to me, it's too biased, because there's too many I can't realistically do that. For the elites I've accumulated, I wasn't doing Westside, I was doing linear periodization. Now I wouldn't have got to where I got if it wasn't for a conjugate, 100%. My bias still falls there, but not at the expense of being able to help somebody that may do better in a different route. Does that help answer that?
Completely, yeah. And I think that's I think that's probably one of the most important takeaways anybody could have is, and I've said it a lot, is you are never not on the hook for getting the right answer. And that means tweaking what you need to tweak to get a good result. And the flexibility of something like Conjugate, Westside, Concurrent, it's what should be its biggest asset, right? It's that you can mold it to yourself based on what you need. But that only works if you're molding it to yourself based on what you need.
And that was a big theme of what we talked about a lot is being able to take this stuff and mold it, being able to understand what the variables of each training system were and what the important takeaways were. If you look at a percentage-based system, what's the important part of the percentage? When the author of that program wrote it out, what was he trying to communicate to the lifter about how the set should feel? Because we know individuals vary on percentage, right? But that doesn't mean that there isn't some comparable or analogous stress that you should be looking for that is going to make that program work. So being able to look at things like that and read between the lines and figure out what the mission is and mold it to yourself, there's nothing better than that. And you're going to find, especially in powerlifting, which is a very individual sport, you're going to find, and I would say strongman too, you're going to find that the best performers are people that were able to do just that found their own list of peculiar methods and approaches that might actually work for them at the expense of following standards that might be necessary for everybody in general. What works for the elites or what works for this person with these particular circumstances may not be the thing that works for the average lifting population. So there has to be, no matter if you get coaching or not, no matter what program you follow, there has to be some learning that goes on your part. There has to be some accountability to know enough about yourself and these different variables to make intelligent changes over time until you solidify a specific approach to training that does in fact work.
Yes.
And then we get into this big clusterfuck. This is like getting into like the high philosophy air, when you're trying to wrap a boundary around ideologies or methodologies. It's like, when is it that thing and when is it no longer that thing? It goes back to, what the fuck is periodization?
Yeah.
But it's like, what? And I know it's probably chapped the asses of so many people in the field when they hear other people give their representation or their interpretation. And it's kind of like, well, this is what the other person had in mind. This is what his athletes did with it. This is who changed it over here. I had a couple of conversations. I talked about how I came up over the last couple of years in YouTube along a lot of this kind of natty lifting community, which is really cool to see. And I had an interview with Alex Leonidas, and a lot of people know him as Alpha Destiny. And he's been around for a long time, has a lot of good information, and he's a big proponent of modified conjugate for what he does. And there's a couple other people as well that I've talked to that do the same thing. And a lot of it addresses a lot of like what you just said. It's like, well, if people are being lazy, well, you can either stick with the speed work or you can trick them into getting some work in. So you can up the volume over here. You can prioritize this amount of exercise selection over here. You can tweak your exercise rotation in this way that's more appropriate to you. And it's an interesting question. At what point is something so modified that it's no longer the original thing? And you can always see the influence there. No doubt it gets credit for that. But yeah, that's when trying to have a conversation about it, when trying to interpret as a lifter that sees this out in the internet, I was that kid. I got taken in by strength sports, and man, I got to get one of the things that I think I've taken the most from anything Westside: marketing, branding, how to make a presence, how to make sure people know who you are and what you're about. Because I was that kid that looked at it and I'm like, that must be what real powerlifting is.
With that whole point I was making is that as things change, and especially lifting systems, if they should change towards the individual, there's some fuzziness on when it preserves like the core values and can still be labeled that thing. And this is what you find in all ideologies. Religion is a good example. You have these core principles that confirm that you are part of this religion, but as it grows, as more people participate, maybe not everybody shares all those core values, or maybe some of the things that branch off of those core values have some overlap or they conflict. and you have a really hard time explaining something which should be pretty simple. And then at the end there, I really was, I was a young kid and I saw the black and white pictures. I saw these monsters of men straining against weight in this basement, dungeon type gym. And that pulled me in. And I saw that happen to a lot of other people. And I got caught into the rigid application of this particular method of training that actually didn't do me justice. I would have been immensely better off if I didn't have that kind of visceral connection to the system, if I was able to just apply it the way it was supposed to be applied, where I could apply myself onto it. But that's kind of the difference when you get involved in something that's very ideologically driven, is you end up putting it on a pedestal. You end up quoting the person that wrote it as if they're like biblical scriptures. And the key takeaway from all of this is that you do what you have to do to get stronger. Nothing is sacred. You turn dials, you move the program around, you find out what works for you. So that was one of the big things I took out of this entire discussion.
Mm-hmm. And then you get pulled in, and you still have to, back when I was all bright-eyed and full of wondered about strength sports before I got, injured and jaded and whatever else. But then you're left trying to make sense of what it is that you've kind of bought into. And it's tricky. And it's tricky no matter what program you do. If I recommend somebody to Shako's textbook, for whatever reason, if I bias that way, I have no illusions about what that climb up that hill is going to be like, what they're going to get wrong. I think the man himself even said he wasn't too thrilled when he figured out people started pulling the examples out of his textbook. So he had to go back and make his own example program for people to run that was more appropriate for the masses. No matter what you do, you're never not on the hook for making it work for yourself. And that's the best thing about lifting, but it's also the thing that probably causes the most fuckery.
It is, and it's the thing that I've seen over a period of time, lifters are taking less and less accountability for. They do want to offload it, which has always been interesting to me, because they'll say that they're all in, but then they want to offload one of the biggest components of what they actually should be responsible for. Thus, they're really not all in. I'm not saying that people can't help with their programming. By most means, they should. But they should be educated enough to be able to ask better questions of what they're being asked to do and to provide better feedback in regards to things like effort and how this felt and those type of things, where they're just like, no, fuck it, I just do whatever my coach says. But your coach is not even with you, right? What the hell? Like, there's so many variables that when you had athletes in your gym, you can see how that training session is going to pan out before they even start the warm-up sets, just on how they carry themselves. There's so many factors that go into play.
And that's a really important point, especially because I do online coaching, and it's a big part of this field. And it's arguably better that you have that way for lifters to come in and connect directly with somebody who can give them some insight, as opposed to the past where people would come in and just do, what the fuck ever. So in that sense, it's an improvement, but it's still far from perfect, because that has to be done in conjunction with somebody who's paying attention, with somebody who is learning, with somebody who can communicate. Like Dave said, you have to be able to communicate with your coach so that you guys can be on the same page. And if you don't even speak the language, if you haven't been doing your basic homework, if you've just been deferring to the program you've been running, been deferring to whatever your coach tells you to do, you're going to be speaking over each other's heads. There's going to be a lot of gains left on the table. So there is a fundamental need for every individual to have a basic understanding, a basic amount of participation. It's never going to be as easy as, here's my spreadsheet, I'm just going to go into the gym and do this, 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 and this.
Make one point on what we were talking about before when we were talking about the different programming. That one thing that I have found with, Conjugate towards more regimented type of systems, because Conjugate's very open. If we just open source, open a lot of these different variables, works really, really well with people that are motivated by chaos, uncertainty, adversity. But if it's somebody that's motivated by significance, it's a train wreck, because they want everything laid out. Like, what's this look like over a period of time, set by set? But they want that really tight, integrated structure. And I think that gets very misrepresented when it comes to people trying to figure out what programs to do. Because they have to have this right here. Other people are like, for me, for instance, like, you get, like, here's what I'm supposed to, like, Meadows would come in with the bodybuilding stuff, like, here's what we're doing. Get that fucking thing out of my face. Like, I know what we need to get done, but I can't it doesn't motivate me. So I think that plays a big factor in there as well.
The psychology of programming. It's like, how many dimensions can you layer on this thing for how many different dimensions of personalization? Because I think it all matters. Mm-hmm. It all matters on what the outcome is. And sometimes it matters so much that something you thought was sacred has to go out the window. You got somebody who is an aggressive, competitive machine. It's like, how much are you going to sacrifice by not cutting them loose when they want to get cut loose, And there's just so many things to consider. And it really is insane. It's almost mind numbing. But if you have a basic foundation to start with and you have a reasonable idea of how to progress forward, there's a lot of potential right answers.
So this is the second part of our discussion. There's a lot more to this. If you want to watch the full 4-hour discussion, it is on any major podcast platform as well as on YouTube. I'll have the link to the YouTube video in the link below. So please check that out. A lot of good nuggets taken out of this. Huge learning experience for me. So I was very honored, very thrilled to be able to have that opportunity. If you have any questions or comments, please do not hesitate to leave them in the comments, or better yet, take it to Patreon, where I upload my training. That's where I respond to direct messages. So if you want to get in touch with me or give a specific comment or recommendation, Patreon is the place to do it. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Until next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.